Welcome to the Relaunch Your Career podcast. I am your host, Leah Lambert, career and interview coach and founder of Relaunch Me, where we help you find the work that you were meant to do. Welcome to the Relaunch Your Career podcast. Today, I am very excited to have a friend of mine, Ashleigh Sheridan, who is going to talk all about her very interesting career in international development. Ash and I met socially a couple of years ago. Funnily enough, we both started our careers as chartered accountants working in little country towns. I grew up in Wagga and worked in a little accounting firm in Wagga after school. And funnily enough, Ash did the same thing growing up in Young, which is a population of about 10,000 people and probably only about an hour from Wagga. So it's a wonder we haven't crossed paths all those years ago. Ash, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Leah.
Ash, I'm really fascinated how, having been an accountant myself and gone down that pathway, and you've done exactly the same thing. Can you tell me how you ended up in accounting in the first place and how you then made the transition to international development?
Absolutely. And it was a really interesting transition, and also probably one that I wasn't really aware of at the time. So I was raised in rural New South Wales in a finance family, whether it was banking, accounting, financial planning, and investment banking. Everyone I knew around me had a career in the finance sector. So I grew up feeling like my career was predetermined. I was preparing for the world of finance. From a young child, I was always really very aligned to social justice issues. So even though academically I knew I was preparing for the financial world, I'd see at a very young age, I'd see a World Vision or Fred Hollow's advertisement and say to my mum, please, can we do something about this? It's not fair that other children don't have enough food. And I was always volunteering, raising funds for charities. In fact, my parents got quite surprised when they came back from a work trip in Tokyo to find 300 daffodils on the front doorstep. I had committed to selling and raising the funds for the Cancer Council, which I did. But being so aligned to these causes, I knew that there was something in that, and there was something that I wanted to do, but my path had been predetermined. So I was preparing for the world of finance, starting with accounting. I then studied a Bachelor of Commerce at the University of Sydney, and I did a double major in accounting and marketing. When I'd be looking at university preferences, I'd sometimes sway towards courses I'd find like human rights law or international studies. And the advice I received was, no, they are not skills. International studies isn't a skill, or you can't make enough money in a career like human rights law. So I'd quickly go and correct my preferences and go back to commerce. Then while I was studying, there were elements of the course that I did like, especially the marketing subjects, but there were a lot of the subjects that I didn't enjoy. I was just getting them done because I had to. And at the time, I didn't know what else I could do. So I just tried to convince myself that I really liked my university course. Then once I graduated, I decided to go traveling for 6 months because I just felt as soon as I started my career in accounting and hopefully transitioning into finance, that's when my life would end, which was probably my first clue that I wasn't cut out for a career in accounting. While I was traveling, I came across an amazing grassroots charity in South Africa, right up in the north on the border of Mozambique. I fell in love with that. It was a community development program. I fell in love with that charity and the programs they were running, and I volunteered there for 3 months. I stayed connected to them for years, and later the experience with that charity was one of the keys to unlocking a career in international development for me. So I came back, started in accounting, didn't enjoy it. So I resigned and applied for a financial administration role at World Vision in Sydney. And I believe that having that accounting skill set and that accounting background was the reason that I was successful in a financial admin role at World Vision. And it showed me that accounting actually provided me with a skill that I could bring to international development. So while I was at World Vision, I then enrolled in a Masters of Development Studies because World Vision showed me that there is this whole new career out there and it's something that I could potentially pursue.
That's so interesting. And it's really interesting because I have this conversation with people from technical backgrounds like accounting and law all the time that if they want to do something purposeful, you don't necessarily have to go and become a physio or a nurse, but you could use your finance or admin or legal skills, but working in a not for profit where you get to be absorbed and in that environment, don't you?
Absolutely. And there are actually so many different programs available for people with all different sorts of skill sets that will allow them to, I guess, start to explore a career in international development. Should I share that now?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more.
So, um, before we jumped on this call, I did a quick search on on roles that were available through a program that I'm really fond of, which is the Australian Volunteers Program through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. That was one of my ins to working in development. So when I finished my master's in development at the University of Sydney, I knew that there were very few international development roles. There are very few practitioner roles here in Australia. And that's on purpose because a lot of the solutions should be locally led. So a lot of the roles should exist in the countries that are running the programs. And there are some roles at places like World Vision and the Red Cross here in Australia, but there are very few of them. And at the time, the Red Cross were running a program very similar to what the Australian Volunteers program is now. And the role was a project manager role and required someone to raise funds and coordinate volunteers. I had, through the South African charity, I had the hands-on experience and what we call in international development as in the field experience. And I came back and set up a volunteer program, helping Australian university students go over to South Africa to volunteer their time. So I had the skill set to take on a year deployment with the Red Cross as a project manager, raising funds, creating projects that the youth in Kenya were interested in pursuing, and coordinating youth volunteers in Kenya. Now, the Australian Volunteers program still run that. And jumping on and having a quick look at the website before this catch up, I found roles like architects in Fiji. There's health professional roles like OTs and physios, doctors, nurses, health educators in Papua New Guinea. There's social work roles in Cambodia, urban planners in Nepal. There's also roles like policy reviews and organisational capacity roles, legal roles in Vanuatu. There was website mentor and STEM roles in South Africa, and I even found a museum curator role in the Republic of the Marshall Islands. So, it's just a few highlights that stood out for me. And those roles are so diverse, but there are deployments anywhere from 3 months to 18 months that allow you to use your existing skills in the international development field so that you can start to use what you have in a way that has an impact in international development.
Amazing. And what a great experiment. I always talk about career experiments, like a great career experiment to test if that's something you might want to move into long term.
Yes, exactly.
Tell us about the Kenya Red Cross experience. It sounds fascinating.
It was. I say, when people ask me what was it like, I always say it was interesting. And that was the polite way of saying it was really challenging, but also very interesting and very rewarding. So I guess an example of the type of work I was doing there, we were looking at programs. There's a high level of education in East Africa. It's phenomenal, but there isn't the microeconomic opportunities often flow on following the education. So I was focused on youth programs that would aid in microeconomic opportunities, as well as disaster response. In Kenya, you have floods every wet season, fires every dry season, and mobilising volunteers and coordinating volunteers to respond to those. And one of the programs I ran was a public health program. So in partnership with the Red Cross partnership with the British military, we would utilise the British military cavalry and medics to access very remote locations in Kenya that would have been really difficult to access otherwise. So we would have the Red Cross youth volunteer, translate, triage, and the medics operate on primary healthcare pop-up facilities. some of the people that we were reaching had never been to a medical clinic at all in their lives. So it was a really amazing project to be a part of, maximum impact. But it was a very interesting lesson for me in approaching international development by listening, asking, and not doing. I thought I'd listened. I thought I'd asked the right questions with my team of youth from the Kikuyu tribe. There are 42 tribes in Kenya. Some of my team weren't members of the tribe whose lands we were whose lands we were working on. So in some of the locations, it went very smoothly, but then there was a location where the camp was actually shot at. Now, no one was harmed. I'm told that it was warning shots that were fired, and I'm also told that the reason was there was the misconception that my team that were volunteering were actually being paid to work on the lands of another tribe, and they felt as though jobs were being taken away from the local community and it wasn't received well. So while I'd asked my team all of the questions, everything, really collaborate, and we were very participatory in the way we decided to run that. I hadn't asked everybody that would be involved, and that was a really harsh lesson to learn.
Wow. And you weren't in the camp when this was happening?
Um, there were people in the camp while this was happening, yes, but it was yes, I was in the camp while this was happening, but it was really a warning shot. No one was harmed.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And so were you traveling around to these remote locations with the team?
Yeah, absolutely. Alongside the British military and the Red Cross team, it was month-long projects at a time, accessing these remote locations.
Wow, how incredible. I mean, what were some of the challenges overall living in Kenya for you?
I think it's really, poverty is really harsh. And I think we can have a romanticized view of international development and our approach to poverty and really feel as though we're making a difference and having this contribution, which we absolutely can. But the reality of poverty um, is a lot harsher than what we can perceive. So I did witness a lot of death as a result of starvation, which was really challenging to see, and a lot of family violence and domestic violence with families that I was serving, or sometimes at times my own team members. And that can be really challenging because what we accept as a cultural value and cultural norm here in Australia isn't the same in Kenya. So you do require a high level of resilience, and you do require the ability to put your own values aside and just try to understand the culture and the people that you're working in. The other thing I would say at times, it's really understanding the culture. There can be, and this isn't unique to just Kenya. It's unique to I have this experience in a lot of countries that I've worked in. There's this really fine line between corruption and culture. What we perceive as corruption is actually culture for some of the communities we're working in. So really understanding that so that you can set the people that you're serving and set your team members up for success as well.
So interesting. Did you find with your time working in these countries that not everyone's cut out for this? Like, would people come across and then pack up and go home? Or is there a fairly stringent recruitment process when sending people into these roles?
I think it's a really stringent recruitment process when sending people into these roles. And at the time that I went, so the year that I went over there, there was 11 of us. And I believe 7 of us finished the full year there. And as much as you can be prepared and, you go through a lot of security and safety training and cross-cultural training, the reality of it is you can't always predict how harsh it's going to be or what challenges someone will face. So while there is a stringent recruitment process, it is challenging. And I think there are human challenges where you're dealing with humans and communities and some at times really unsafe environments, and you can't always predict how that will play out.
Can you give us another examples of some of your experiences working in these remote countries?
Yeah, another experience that I had, and it was in terms of safety, it was a much safer experience than my time in East Africa. But a more recent project was one in Cambodia, and another great lesson. So we were doing a water project in rural Cambodia. Communities there are often sick, unwell as a result of drinking unclean water. And that's having huge impacts on then education and microeconomic outcomes, because if you're too sick, you can't work. And I mean, we went and to understand the community before we turned soil, and some people were reporting being sick up to 25 days a month.
Wow.
So huge impact on quality of life. So we prepared the project. We worked really closely with the Australian counterpart for the organisation we'd be partnering with on this water project in rural Cambodia. And we asked so many questions around even the surveys. How do we deliver this? How the surveys before we start and when we finish the project, are these questions appropriate? We're asking things that could be really challenging. And they were all, it was all approved. We'd negotiated, and I got to Cambodia and I sat down with the local Cambodian team just to run through the translation, just to triple check my work. And what we learnt was we were asking questions about education. And there was a genocide during the 1970s in Cambodia where being educated was a death sentence. So the day before about to arrive in community to start the socialisation process and ask these questions, we're scrapping them all. We're trying to rework how we'd run this program to make sure it was culturally appropriate, culturally safe, we wouldn't cause any harm. And that was another really interesting lesson about the sensitivities of working in these communities and asking locals before you start work. We got through it, and I believe that we did remove the questions from the impact surveys to make sure they were appropriate, and the project went really smoothly and really well. There were local team members that were working side by side, Australian tradespeople, to implement clean water and toilet blocks in 2 schools to make sure that there was sanitation, as well as clean drinking water, which together combined, they have a really big impact on health outcomes. And then the other things that we just talked about, like education and economic outcomes. And I think that I almost believe that the Australian tradies got as much from the experience as the local team members that were learning from them. Just that reciprocity of working together, learning from each other.
Experiences you've described, I guess, are really international aid, but I know there are also opportunities to work in this space based in Melbourne, like the roles you've done recently at the Reece Group. Can you tell us a little bit more about those corporate responsibility roles and how you've been able to have an impact from roles that are based in Melbourne?
Definitely. And one of my favourite experiences is actually through an Australian program, which I'll share in a moment, but starting with the corporate social responsibility and how to transition into that. Personally, I'd been exposed to the financial world through my upbringing and through that brief time in accounting, and saw how efficient it was and how effective some companies can be at making money. They want to do good. And then I would see how resource poor some of the not-for-profits were, and how their work was really impactful and really meaningful, but they weren't able to get the most out of their spend because budgets were always at risk. Future funding commitments were always at risk. So I wanted to transition my career into connecting the two worlds, the corporate and the not-for-profit sector. So CSR, corporate social responsibility roles, were exactly how I achieved that. And my most recent role in corporate social responsibility was with Reece Group. So I started in a CSR team and got to work on really interesting projects like coordinating and supporting the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group and some of the amazing initiatives that took place as a result of that RAP, and wonderful partnerships with charities, mental health charities, men's health charities, and youth as well. And then out of that also the Reece Foundation was born. There are a lot of natural synergies with Reece Group being a plumbing merchant with customers that are arguably the most qualified tradespeople in the world with skills that could have a huge impact on water and sanitation. So I created the Reece Foundation as part of my role, as part of my CSR role there at Reece. And then I went on to lead the projects and social impact of the Reece Foundation. And one of my favourite projects that I worked on was with a charity called Rural Aid. I would have to say they're one of my favourite charities in Australia. They exist to support farmers through hardship. They support with disaster response, recovery, and then all the way through to resilience and preparing for the next disaster, which is common, unfortunately, in Australia, a nation of floods and droughts. So I was with the Reese Foundation, and we partnered with them through their tank project, a water tank project, where the farmers in the Central West region near Ugara that were impacted by floods were heading into a drought during the recovery phase of that flood. And Rural Aid donated the tanks to a number of local farming families. And I brought along the tradespeople to volunteer to install the tanks on these properties. And it was so nice because I grew up, like you said, in Young, which is on the border of the Riverina and the Central West region. So it was so close to home, and it just felt like one of the most amazing experiences to think I've done 15 years working all over the world, and I'm now getting to have an impact in the community I grew up in. And it was also really special because I know how hard life can be for farmers. They often need support, and they're the least likely to ever ask for it. So it was amazing to be able to support farmers who are the backbone of our nation, the backbone of our country, who often need support the most, but never put their hand up. So that was one of my all-time favorite projects.
That sounds amazing. Can you tell us a bit more, like you mentioned how you can transition into CSR? I often speak to clients who are interested in this area, and I know I've got another friend who's worked in that space, probably more from a comms background. What sort of people move into this area, and what are the skills that they need?
It's interesting because, well, you're right. CSR often does sit within communications or marketing teams, and you do often require those skill sets to sit in the CSR role. And I think you require an ability to influence and to bring people on board with your idea and to be able to publicly share and market your idea. But I think there are ways to, transition irrespective of your skill set when you think about your reconciliation action plan working group, for example, or thinking about supply chain. So if I use Reese as the example, some of the initiatives from the reconciliation action plan cross the people and culture department and creating safe environments and opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and other culturally and linguistically diverse people to be able to feel safe at work and participate. We've got, when you're looking at supply chains and making sure there's ethical supply chains, you've got procurement teams and merchandising teams that can bring their skill sets to initiatives like this. When you're looking at project budgets, you've got finance teams that can help plan for that, prepare for that, and then also support the initiatives that you're looking at. So when you look at something like that as an example, there are so many different skill sets, and that's the reason they're often working groups in these corporate organisations, because lots of skill sets are required to bring that to life. The other thing you could do, irrespective of your role, is speak to the CSR team. If you have an ESG or CSR team at the company that you're working with, they often are hosting events to raise money or awareness or to support an organisation they're partnering with. Put your hand up to be a part of that and support that, because you start to get exposure to the work of the charity partner or the cause that can help you to start to understand more what's involved with that charity and what's involved with that cause, and how could my skill set add value in the long term to that.
Like getting involved in maybe some working groups or internal committees, that's a great way to demonstrate your interest in this area as well.
Yeah, and there are a lot. I know in construction, for example, there's some great organisations that'll have, it's a diversity and inclusion working group, because there are some of the construction companies I've had exposure to, it's about creating diverse communities. So that's what they label it. There's other groups that'll call it the sustainability working group. There's others that'll call it social impact, whatever that looks like, getting involved in an area that's of interest to you.
Great tip. Can I just go back and ask you one question? I think I know the answer to this, but I think it'd be interesting for other people to hear it. If someone was interested in getting into international development, I understand that going and doing some volunteer work overseas, like we've discussed, is a great way to test that idea or do a little bit of an think of it as an experiment. In your experience, I would imagine, though, to get into this area, it's very competitive, which would mean you would need to either have a bachelor degree in international development or a master's. Do you agree with that?
I think it's a requirement often to be a practitioner in international development. But like I said before, those practitioner roles are extremely rare, but you can be involved in international development without necessarily being the hands-on practitioner. So yes, often while a degree is important, I actually think it's the hands-on experience and skill sets that will often get people roles. If we think about some of the not-for-profits or here in Australia and abroad, they're run like organizations. They have a legal team, they have a people and culture team, they have a finance team, they have a sales and marketing division that raises funds and awareness of the causes, as well as the community development practitioners. So there is ways to transition into that. And I also think with that hands-on experience, you can get it here in Australia. So an example is if you wanted to volunteer in a local community charity or organisation, there are so many great programs here in Australia that support culturally and linguistically diverse communities. So that's a way to enhance your experience in working cross-culturally.
Yeah, and there's also roles like grant writers, donor relations. So they're a bit more probably for someone who's done a degree in international development, would you say?
Yeah, I don't know if you would require a degree in international development to be a grant writer. I think a comms or a communications expert or someone that's brilliant, anyone that's brilliant at writing or creating content could transition over to those types of roles. So while the practitioner roles definitely require a degree in international development, there's a lot that don't necessarily require that, but the hands-on experience may be better.
Okay, great. So you've already given us some great tips on how someone might get into this area. Is there any other advice you would have if someone out there is thinking about choosing this area as their first career or potentially transitioning as part of a career change? Is there anything else that you would suggest that they need to consider?
I think they would need to consider motivations for doing the work. So I often use the term when I'm working in international development as a practitioner, be a helper, not a hero. So making sure that you're listening and you're understanding and you're helping the community rather than feeling as though you've got an answer or a solution. So if your motivation is to be a helper, not a hero, then this is definitely the right career path for you. I think also um, resilience, making sure that you develop that resilience and be prepared to live in sometimes challenging and at times unsafe environments. Of course, progress with that security and safety training, but still, no training can really prepare you for some of the things you'll see. So I think make sure you're a resilient person or have a resilient personality. And I think also potentially it's be prepared to travel, be prepared to live overseas for a period of time or for a career. And if you are working here in Australia, there are very few international development roles that would not require you to travel frequently.
When we talk about challenging living conditions, what are the worst sort of conditions you've lived in, Ash?
Well, I guess I lived in East Africa during a time of drought and also there was a lot of political violence and terrorism. So my water, I lived in a mud brick hut, and my water would be turned off for 3 days at a time, and then I'd have it on for 3 days at a time. So not having access to running water for 3 days, at a time during the dry season was something I had to think about and prepare for. So buying bottled water to have in the house and also filling buckets. So at the end of the day, it would be really hot and really dusty having a bath in a bucket. So that was definitely interesting. I think also there were terrorist threats at the time I was living there. So there were periods of lockdown, and that was before COVID, right? So a lockdown was it had quite an intense feeling to it. So there would be 2 or 3 days at a time where I wasn't allowed to leave the hut or the compound, depending on which country I was in, because of a threat. So that was interesting. And then there's not the same access to Western medical facilities as well. So preparing, I had a year's worth of, anti-malaria medication and medication if I was to contract malaria because I was living in a red zone and all of that type of preparation because the facilities just aren't available. The facilities to the standard that we've become used to and accustomed to in countries like Australia aren't available.
If you're someone who likes 5-star accommodation, maybe choose a career in accounting.
Yeah, exactly.
Ash, you're doing your own work now as a consultant with your company, Ikigai. Can you tell us a little bit about who you're hoping to work with or who you are working with, what sort of, and how people could find you if they were interested in your services?
Thank you for asking, Leah. Yeah, I found a path for me that really lights me up. So it was, it blends the commercial world with the development sector for me. So Ikigai Co is about connecting and supporting companies that exist and want to use their business for good. So I feel as though we're going beyond thinking about a company that does some good on the side uh, to a company that exists for good, a purpose-driven, purpose-led company. So they're who I want to work with and connect them with the not-for-profit world, help organizations connect to have impact in really efficient ways. An example at the moment is working with an organization in Indonesia and a local company that specializes, they have wonderful tradespeople as well in the construction space, and really trying to connect them to have an impact in the most efficient way, utilizing their skills to support a community in Indonesia. So it really, it excites me. And I think the motivation is, I was looking at some statistics recently, and millennials and Gen Z currently make up about 30% of the purchasing, the customer market. But by 2030, that's going to be 50%. And they're predicted to have around $4 trillion a year to spend. And 80% of their purchases will be based on brands that align with their sustainability and social impact motivations and aligns with the causes that they care about. So I really want to future-proof businesses to be, I guess, one of the brands move into 2030 and beyond.
Yeah, how interesting. And not so, it doesn't surprise me at all. The companies that I know that are doing this, like Reese and Cotton On, and I know Origin Energy do a lot of work in this area. Do they need to be big corporate organizations to do this type of work, or would you work with medium-sized businesses that are also wanting to do something that's more purposeful?
My criteria is a company that wants to use their business for good. I'm size agnostic. I love working with the medium tier firms because often it's quick decisions and they're able to have an impact really quickly and transition really quickly. But whether it's a small business or whether it's an ASX listed company, I'm really comfortable working across any of those organizations. The main criteria is genuine, authentic interest in creating sustainability and social impact agenda.
Amazing. Well, Ash, I will put a link to your website, which is launching, I believe, next week, and your LinkedIn, as well as the Australian Volunteers page that you mentioned, and any of the other links. I'll put those in the show notes. So if anyone is interested, please have a look at the links. And if you're interested in doing some work with Ash, please contact her and see how she can help your business do something more purposeful. So thank you, Ash. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And thanks for those very interesting examples of what it's like to work in international development.
Lastly, Leah, the other thing I'll share is that for anyone that is interested in transitioning and exploring international development, I'll share some websites with some great examples of the type of roles that are available globally.
Amazing. Thank you, Ash. Have a great day. And yeah, all the best with launching your new website.
Thank you very much, Leah.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Relaunch Your Career. If you did, please subscribe, share with your friends, leave a review, or connect with us on social media at Relaunch Me Career Consulting. If you have any questions about the episode or the work that we do, then contact us via the website relaunchme.com.au. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.